Hey guys, my name is John Simo, and today I'm going to take you through my top tips and tricks for neon portraits. Now, we're sitting here in Neon Demon Studio, my colorful playground, and I've had the opportunity to shoot hundreds and hundreds of photos in here. Cut to my work. And with shooting that much content, I've definitely learned a thing or two along the way. So I'm gonna give you a few tips and tricks to dramatically increase your skills in just 10 minutes. Now, before we get started, if you guys don't have your own neon files, you can grab my raw files below to play around with yourself. And I'm going to be using Lightroom, but this will translate over to Photoshop just fine. This first portrait is a personal favorite of mine. It has this really cinematic tone to it, like a neon version of Trinity in The Matrix. It was photographed on the Canon EOS R with a 50mm prime lens and lit with 2 RGB tubes off of Amazon. I decided to use some spray water on the phone booth to add some subtle texture into the frame. So I've got my portrait here in Lightroom, and the very first thing I always check is what camera profile I have selected. Lightroom tends to default to the Adobe color profile, which can be great in many situations. But with neon imagery, I find that it tends to mute all these beautiful colors. So I'll click the profile drop-down menu and toggle to camera standard. This will revert the images back to how it actually looked on your camera's viewfinder while shooting. If you don't see camera standard, you can click the 4 boxes and go to camera matching to view all of the embedded picture profiles. Now that I've got the image more like how it was shot here in my studio, I want to start playing around with the colors and see how far I can push them. A favorite trick of mine is one that I've borrowed from my astrophotography experience. You go down to your vibrancy and saturation sliders and move them both to 100. Your image is going to start to look really psychedelic, but bear with me. Using my white balance and tint sliders, I'm going to play around with them to see how my colors behave. What I'm looking for is a good mix of hues with good color gradation. This is really helpful to find that sweet spot of color that you use as your jumping off point. Once I'm happy with the colors, I'll go back down to my vibrance and saturation sliders and make sure to reset them back to 0. Your image should be really nicely balanced now. From there, I'll typically desaturate my image by about 10 to 20 points and increase the vibrance by 20 to 30 points. The vibrance slider is looking at all the more dull colors in your image and selectively increasing their saturation without actually affecting colors that are already intense. Super helpful. Now that I've spent more time playing with my overall image, it's time to introduce some radial filters. On any given photo, I'm using between 3 and 5 different radial filters to fix everything from skin tones, add cinematic haze, and really refine specific areas of the frame. On this photo, I'm going to add 3 filters. Begin by clicking your radial filter button to add it to your image. The first thing I want to do is even out the tone of the face and add more detail. So I'm going to balance the colors by continuing to adjust the white balance and hue until I find a happy medium. The one thing I want to stress is to not obsess over natural skin tones in neon photography. If you're standing beside a red neon sign, your skin is going to be slightly red. Make sure your model's skin still looks human, but don't start muting all the beautiful colors in your frame just to compensate. Another thing I like to do with this radial filter focused on the face is add some clarity but remove texture. This is going to subtly soften any imperfections while maintaining sharpness. It's great for skin. As you can see here, radial filters are extremely helpful. I love this tattoo here and want to make sure it's pronounced but not too distracting. So I'm going to add another thin radial filter here and start to bring down the highlights so that your eye goes to the model's face first and then explores the frame afterwards. Now, if I switch images quickly, I want to show you guys a really neat trick for adding haze or atmosphere to your skin using these radial filters. I simply create a big circle, make sure feathering is turned all the way up to 100, and then slowly introduce dehaze into the negative numbers. This is going to take the overall light of the area and really soften it up. To ensure that it still matches the overall lighting of the scene, Once I have this desired hazy look I'm going for, I'm going to introduce a bit more contrast and saturation so it doesn't stand out. You can use this dehaze trick to add subtle glow from light sources, or even hits of colored light at the edge of your frame. Now that you've got your image where you like it, it's time to add the final touches to make sure it looks as good as possible on Instagram, Facebook, or wherever it is online that you're posting. Have you ever posted something and wondered, where did the sharpness and intensity of my image go? Well, that's because of an annoying little thing called compression. When your 30 megapixel work of art goes from Lightroom to Instagram, it gets shrunken down significantly. In this process, your image loses a lot of detail, so you have to ensure you properly sharpen it in advance. So let's check out the Detail tab in Lightroom. Here's where the magic happens. Turn your sharpening up to 40, and then by holding down Alt on Windows or Option on Mac, click on the masking slider and start moving it. In this mode, you'll be able to selectively choose what is being sharpened. Anything white will receive sharpening, while anything black will remain untouched. This is hugely helpful for just increasing detail of your model or your frame without introducing more noise. Once you've got your mask where you want it, you can play around with the radius, which is how much of your fine lines are being affected, and detail, which is how intense the sharpening is rendered. I usually leave these at the default numbers and just worry about the overall amount. In order to ensure your image still looks this sharp when it lands on Instagram, you're going to want to overly sharpen it. So if you're happy with a level of 40, try pushing it to 50. If your image looks too sharp, then you've hit the sweet spot. Next, go to File, Export, and make sure your sharpening export settings are set to Screen and Standard. I always export my photo at the highest resolution I can, because no matter how you format your photo, it's still going to be compressed by Facebook and Instagram. You cannot get around this. Then, just make sure you're using the sRGB color space instead of Adobe RGB. sRGB is the worldwide standard for photography and ensures consistency from screen to screen. Adobe RGB tends to compact the colors into a smaller range, which can really make them look dull, and nobody wants that. Make sure to install my free preset Demonic into Lightroom. It's super easy. Just hit the plus icon in your preset tab, navigate to wherever you unzipped the folder, and double-click the XMP file. This look works fantastically on not only neon portraits, but most low light and nighttime photos as well. I would highly recommend clicking through each and every adjustment tab to see my own process, and try messing around with the sliders yourself to see what you get. If you want to grab even more looks for your color portraits, you can check out my Volume 1 preset pack, which includes 10 custom looks that I've meticulously tested on just about every camera brand out there. They're one-click looks that will completely transform your image. On top of that, I include 35 abstract neon overlays, which can easily be dragged and dropped onto your photo to create a really dynamic effect instantly. So what do you guys think? Did you learn something you didn't know before? I hope so. These tips and tricks have saved me a ton of headache in the past, and I do think they're honestly super useful. For more neon related goodness, you can check out the Instagram at Neon Demon Studio and my personal account at John Simo to see all my work. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you soon.